Although my creative works employ a wide variety of instruments, media, styles, and even techniques, they are unified in my approach to begin composing by first determining or designing a compositional technique that leverages the built-in features of the performance situation. A metaprocess I call native composition. This approach pursues elegance, novelty, and insight by exploiting what comes naturally in a given performance situation, even if it is normally considered a mistake or glitch, while minimally introducing arbitrary elements. Composed for a building with elevated train tracks on either side and an Airstream trailer on top, Fast Standing Still uses a melody transcribed from the security message heard on the passing trains. If you see something, say something. Electronic percussion sounds are carved from recordings of passing trains, and the meandering celesta accompaniment is driven by video of the surrounding skyline. The light jazz style and the instrumentation, two bass instruments, were chosen to reflect the Airstream trailer's visual style and its weight. Native composition does not require digital technology. My Etude No. 3 for horn embraces the natural harmonics of the instrument. Instead of seeing every musical instrument as general-purpose tools, I consider what comes most naturally, most easily for an instrument, and seek to maximally exploit those abilities, even if they would be considered to be mistakes in standard playing, like playing out of tune. Much of my work interrogates our feelings toward liveness and mediation in performance by improvising with an acoustic performer, as I use software that cannot play sound on its own, but only transforms sound that was captured in the moment. These live sampling improvisations allow audiences to hear the digital copy as missing some aura compared to the original event we all just witnessed, which gives authenticity and value to that past now retroactively, and then we witness the transformed samples take on a unique role and influence the performance as it continues. My generative installation, The Collected Solo Piano Works of Ferran Martino as Conjured by Your Presence, uses nearby motion to disrupt the flow of generative music played on a digital player piano. The algorithm is capable of making music on its own, but when it senses motion nearby, it lets that motion shape the music. It does not sonify the motion it sees, but it will respond to it or flex with it as an accompaniment. This short-circuits the listener-music relationship, such that the music cannot be heard without being present, thereby corrupting the music so the pure or original music can never be heard. Another way to supercharge a performance situation and bring the situation to the fore is to feed the output of a system into its own input, whatever type of system it may be. My work, Tappa Tappa Tappa, uses a small speaker cone as a musical instrument by connecting it to a microphone input, turning the speaker into an input transducer, running that through a shifting network of digital delays, and sending the output to the speakers in the venue to be picked up in turn by the input transducer. In performance, I aim and move the input transducer through space, causing different resonant modes of the room to resonate. As the performance continues, invisible points in space become almost tactile as I and the audience become acquainted with the sonic results of moving there. As the acoustic system rings out in response to my movements, and as the digital system constantly warps and shifts the space, it becomes almost as if the space starts to shape my movements in response. I end up wrestling in a quite real, albeit aesthetic way, with invisible but audible forces that live in the room. Feedback is also at work in Sekou-de, in which the only sound source is a feedback mixer, or no input mixer. The outputs of a large 1980s Tascam M16 mixing console are fed into its own inputs, causing its channels to sing in their most native voice, absent any sound external to it. More than being an unusual way to make a synthesizer, this configuration causes all of the mixer's controls to take on musical functions that are different from their labels. Treble and bass filters, left-right pan controls, and volume faders instead might affect pitch, the speed of a steady pulse, or timbre in complex ways. It reveals that in their normal operations, these controls do not simply do their work by increasing or decreasing explicit treble or loudness parameters, but instead they twist and shape the electronic oscillation in ways that, in normal circumstances, happen to achieve the results that their labels describe. It puts the performer in a more deeply intimate and visceral relationship to the instrument, and in a wild and exploratory creative mindset in performance. It takes a tool that is supposed to be transparent, only shaping and improving sounds to present them faithfully in their best light, and it lets the thing itself sing its own native song. Whereas many digital artworks are digital for sake of convenience over analog, physical, or manual means, byte-beat coding is intensely immersed in the situation of the digital computer. Its constraints force the programmer to wrestle with the system on its own terms. It's difficult to compose or improvise in a deterministic way in byte-beat. Instead, one finds oneself working so deeply in an exploratory mindset that the result might fairly be called generative music, since it emerges from this wrestling process, even if a source of randomness is not used. My work, The Persistence of Illusion, Hard and Soft Dances, uses a similar phase-locked structure to recreate a 1980s-style drum machine, and makes new music by manipulating the one thing that is supposed to remain constant, the clock, or ramp. Since all sounds and control shapes are derived from that clock, new unintended timbres, textures, and gestures emerge, ones that are simultaneously new, previously unheard, and also more true to the underlying structure than their labels mimicking traditional acoustic percussion instruments. Invited to join a funded collaboration focused on machine learning at my university, my first and ongoing approach to native composition for machine learning systems was to give a voice to its errors and its uncertainty. For this, I needed a crib sheet structure in which a classifier system could report its best conclusions about an input, but an absolute correct answer could also be known at the same time, so I can compare the two in real time and let any differences drive the music. Divining Rod uses a camera and a classifier system to determine what key I am pressing on a typing keyboard. Of course, the computer also directly reports the ASCII code of each key that is pressed. The camera-driven classifier controls the frequency of a sine wave. The ASCII codes of the keys that are actually pressed process that sine wave in ways that result in silence when the classifier concludes correctly, through amplitude modulation and also a band reject filter. However, this process also proliferates any errors. Greater errors result in louder and more complex sounds. This way, only the mistakes of the system are heard. The uncertainty or incorrect confidence of the system will become readily apparent in whether the audible errors wobble erratically or lock in on a constant tone. While each of these approaches is distinct, many of them are similar in their spirit of thwarting expectations to make artistic results emerge, or by using things in wrong ways. Technology facilitates these kinds of reuse or misappropriation by virtue of the fact that it can only represent anything as numbers that have no awareness of what they mean. Their labels are stored separately. In order to reinterpret, map, or otherwise misread data, one need only change their labels. More broadly, these techniques fit the composer's notion of economy, looking to derive new material from the musical decisions that have already been made rather than bringing in something unrelated. This typically means creating a new melody by inverting, reversing, or otherwise twisting some melody that has already been written in the music, to build some subtle coherence throughout the work. However, in my examples, composerly economy applies just as well to considering the situation of a performance as some of the musical decisions already made, so new material can be derived in some way from those factors. It's also similar in spirit to Douglas Hofstadter's notion of the strange loop to describe the structure of several examples in literature, visual art, music, and philosophy, in which some form of self-defeating self-reference evokes a phenomenon, sensation, or idea that lies outside what should be possible within the confines of a given context. Hofstadter uses the strange loop to muse at the nature of intelligence as something that lies beyond simply being the sum of all the logic inside it. Similarly, native composition as a general approach to making music seeks not to make music by combining notes in new ways, but instead to make new properties of the musical listening experience emerge in our awareness and to explore the potential of these previously underexplored dimensions for creative expression and aesthetic experiences. To extract something from deeper inside the essence of things and their situations, in order to reflect more deeply and fully upon their nature and the nature of music itself.